mention before we get started. I wanted to tell you about an invitation that I was asked to attend by the Lego League called Soggy Waffles, representing fifth graders of Garrett Park, although it's not a public school competition or league. It's just, countywide, statewide, national, and a world. So right now we have some young individuals who are making up a team called Soggy Waffles, and they wanted to present to me the presentation that would be judged later in January. They had us come at January 23rd. I invited Andrea and George Miller to come as well. They had 3 solutions for the Garrett Park Dog Park. And they did this all out of Legos. It's pretty phenomenal. The price range was from, I think it was about 25 or so to 40 to 68,000. It was done by survey initially, and the survey went out through the Garrett Park Neighbors List. Only 37 responded, and half of them had dogs. But more than twice as many were in favor of the $68,000 proposal. We have posted the proposal on the website. I also have a copy here, if you'd like to see it. They came in 3rd, and they are going on to the state finals. So it's pretty exciting for them. This is the first time there's been a competition at this level for this group. Okay, that's what I want to mention. Take a look at the website if you want to hear more about it. And now we're going to go into the approval of the agenda. Is everybody okay with that?
I wanted to add something, and I guess we could put it under updates for lack of better words. I know a couple residents are here to talk about the railroad crossing and the use of horns. So I just wanted to formally add that to the agenda.
Okay, and will you be?
I will be, yeah.
At next point?
Yep.
Is that next to you, Phil?
Yep.
We'll call it train crossing.
Train horns.
What? Train crossing and whistle.
Train whistle.
Train whistle and crossing. Train crossing and whistle. This be after traffic and parking? Where would you like that, Phil?
Wherever. I'm fine with putting it there.
After? Before or after traffic? And
I can put it after traffic and parking because traffic and parking's
okay.
not that big tonight. And
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Any
Okay.
other changes to the agenda before you approve it? Okay, all in favor with that change included?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. Want to say for the record that Councilman Dan Simons and Councilman Stephen Paskowski are both out today. However, we do have a quorum of council members here. We have 3, so 3 out of 5 is a quorum here, so we are still good to go. And we will take that unanimous decision on approving the agenda. Okay. Approval of minutes. We have 2 minutes, if you remember. There was one we needed to change. That was for the December minutes.
Yep.
And it was decided in January to allow Stephen Paskowski to make additional edits. He didn't have them in time, so we wanted to post them later. And so they are now contained in the December minutes. And if you've all had a chance, we would now approve the December minutes. Any discussion or December 9th minutes.
The only thing, well, I guess it's not really, I was thinking, is it going to be a change or not, would be may introduce items in the corner lots as soon as January. Well, January's passed, but I guess because this is from December, it doesn't really matter. I see.
Yeah, right, I read that, right. Thomas, do you have that copy of December 9th?
I have not, but
Okay.
I've read it.
So are we okay to approve these now?
I'm fine with them as is.
So am I.
I don't know how to read it.
So December 9th minutes are approved. And now we have the draft minutes for January 13th council meeting. Have a chance to look at those. We'd like to ask your approval.
The only question I have is on traffic and parking. Did we have a more specific decision about what the phased-in approach would be?
No, we haven't put out, I haven't put out anything on that. I just put out some notices, but that was as far as I went.
Right, I think that encompassed the warning
But-
notices that we were going to give to
Mhm.
residents ahead of issuing citations.
Right.
And I think after last council meeting in January, we did get the letter from the county executive delegating the town, delegating the mayor for issuing tickets. So, and now it's up to us to decide who we want to have issue the tickets.
Right.
Okay,
So
then I'm all right
is
with
that
that.
good enough?
When we got the thing, I saw that we had the letter basically saying that we're authorized now to start issuing tickets after we collect the ticket books from the appropriate town or
Right.
county repository.
Okay. So, any other discussions on these minutes?
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine.
So am I.
Okay. Unanimously approved by council for the January 13th minutes. Okay. Presentations by residents.
Thank you. I'm Bill Rivers. I live at 11201 Rokeby Avenue. And I was speaking with Barry Lydon here, though I don't presume to put words in his mouth. The issue of the train whistle, it's been remarked that the train whistle is now much louder at the station, and I know this has come up infrequently over the last however many years as a matter for the town council, but we would be interested in seeing if there is an appropriate way to approach the Federal Railway Administration or the State Railway Safety Administration to change the designation of the crossing, which is listed as a private road crossing. It's my understanding that CSX owns the crossing that what used to be Garrett Park Road some 50 years ago and is now a pedestrian pathway. It is private property that it belongs to CSX. CSX has apparently granted the use of this to The county, it is, I'm not sure how it technically qualifies as a road. It may well, but that would be something that perhaps federal or state regulators could address. And that changing that designation either to a public crossing, which I understand has significant expenses and other challenges associated with it, or if there is another mechanism whereby adjusting that to include the other crossing, which is the, as Councilmember Schulp has indicated in an earlier conversation, is in fact the station itself, and that the station would have a different pattern. Now, the issue is that, so we live on Rokeby, our property backs up to the train tracks, and it's 2 short whistles and a long whistle and a short whistle going southbound into Washington at whatever time, and that usually starts right about our property, just that's a very inexact judgment because it's loud. And then, of course, at the train station itself, there's a slightly different pattern for passenger trains, for the MARC train, when it stops and starts. So it seems that under the regulations governing, the federal regulations governing railroad whistles, there's some degree of latitude based on the official designation of those crossings. Now, the reason that we are bringing this up now is that when you look at the Federal Railroad Administration's safety database, its crossing database, that crossing apparently has not been physically examined by anything we can tell since 1970. So those of you who may have been town residents back then and were playing around Penn Place as kids may have remembered that as a road, but it's been a very long time since that was actually a road with vehicular traffic. So we were asking the town to consider approaching the appropriate state and federal regulatory agencies, and if need be, involving our elected officials in the state and federal level to clarify, but that's probably a secondary step once we get some answers back from the appropriate regulatory agencies. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody want to have any follow-up questions here?
No, I think we had discussed offline. I think we just need to get together via email or something later on. Again, maybe, again, I think looking into trying to do it as part of the station may help because it'll basically mean that they won't have to blow for another crossing that's literally like 50 feet away. And I think that's part of the problem. And I have looked this up. It is automatic on some stuff. Not on all equipment, but on some equipment, as part of the positive train control, they've added this feature, which makes it automatic, that the thing will automatically blow for the crossing. And unfortunately, in modern day, the horns either on or off. In the old days, you had a valve, and you could kind of feather it a bit and make it a little bit quieter. But now it's like too loud, and especially there at the station. The other thing we can look at too is to see if they're within the decibel limit, because the federal government's also put out a decibel limit for the horn, as to how loud it can be, which I know is like 120 dB, but I think is like, I don't remember how many feet. It's been a while.
For those of us who take the train, and I take it somewhat infrequently, I know there are others that commute on it, when that whistle blows in the station, you can feel the sound waves. No matter what you do, it's even 120 decibels is a pretty loud when you're right at that point source.
Yeah. It's extremely loud.
Yeah.
And I will also say that the short typically there's 2 shorts as they move the train, and that's actually optional, just because they use radio, so it doesn't really need to be used anymore theoretically. But a lot of places, a lot of guys do that. So that might be a little bit, but I think the bigger one's the grade crossing. We got to figure out how to.
Right, and the reason that we bring it up, my family would like to see this happen, is that pattern coming southbound, and I assume similar for people who live on Cambria going northbound, is actually quite loud. That 2 short and 1 long as the trains come through, especially overnight, that can be disruptive.
In case not everybody is aware, we have asked Phil and Dan Simons to be the liaisons on this issue, because we have been hearing an awful lot about it through emails and some phone calls. And Melanie Caesar is the resident lead coordinating this. So bringing you all together on that makes the most sense. So reach out. Melanie Caesar, she also lives up on Montrose, sort of on the top of the hill between Argyle and Waverly. She was willing to champion this because she's very familiar with the, what is it called, the quiet zone in
Yeah.
Tacoma Park, that they went to. Tacoma Park was able to get listed as a.
As was Kensington at some point in the last 10 or 15 years, was able to get a quiet zone designation, so.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we'll be following up and hearing more about it.
We'll hear less about it.
Learning less.
Hopefully.
That's the goal.
Okay.
Were you speaking?
Lost your agenda.
Okay, next on the agenda is action items. And first on the, under action items is the appointment of a new election judge. Our election judge appointed last year, Ben Smith. He's a college student and on the West Coast going to school, and he cannot return in time to take that important role. So he has had to recuse himself there, and we're appointing someone to replace him to fill the next term, and the next term happens to be next spring anyway. So it is just this one-time appointment for 1 year, basically. So the volunteer who has come forward is John Shirkey, and I'd like to appoint him as the election judge. If you would all approve that?
It's fine with me.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Sharkey.
Yeah, fine with me.
Okay, approved. Thank you. Okay, now we have the adoption of the FY20 mid-year budget adjustment. Last month, we had the introduction. That was approved. There was an amendment in that, an adjustment, and then it was approved as introduced with amendments. So now we're back to adopting it. Anybody have any questions about it? Andrea can answer any questions you have.
Well, I have some comments. This is an increase that exceeds by far any mid-year adjustment we've made. We're up essentially $110,000. And I think at 8.5% of the budget, that's a fairly steep increase. I'm covered in this proposal, increase in the town, across the town administration by $68,000, almost $70,000, which includes general administration up by $46,000, contract office assistant for $25,000, and an IT operation improvement for $20,000. I would like, before I can approve this, I'd like to see the justification of the rationale spelled out for, certainly for the general administration, $46,000, and for the contract assistant, office assistant, $25,000. To me, this is without giving us the benefit, the council, the benefit of a document that spells out why we did it. And I'm not against this. What I want is a set of documents that explains to me why mid-year we have come to the point where we need to spend an additional $80,000 and $68,000 on town administration. So I would like to postpone this vote until the town office has a chance to put that together, because I'm not comfortable voting on it just now. I I also see capital expenses, and here's my real problem. We exceeded the revenue in 2020, projected to go up by essentially $350,000, which is nice problem to have. But I would really like to see a discussion on the part of the council on where that should be spent and how it should be spent. And my personal preference is that we designate that sort of thing, at least have a discussion with it as a council in a working session, where we talk about, do we take some of those monies, or all of those monies that are our windfall, essentially, and designate them into an account like the renovation of Town Hall, which I think, and I personally, having been on the council for quite a few terms, really frustrated by the fact that we keep talking about this and we keep not setting money aside for it. And I would like to have a discussion with the part of the council in a working session where we talk about what are the needs that I see or that each of us sees, as opposed to those which are managing, adding to operational costs which haven't been, in my view, adequately, the case hasn't been adequately made that we need those increases. We have a cost increase in the capital side of $80,000. But what I really would like to see is a breakdown of the increase in revenue that we experience over and above what was budgeted, and show me where you're proposing to spend that. So
Are you saying operations or revenue? Because I just heard you say revenue.
Revenue, I'm sorry. On the revenue side. I was talking about operations before, I'm not talking about it, and I apologize for that. But I would like for the council to have at its disposal a set of numbers that says, here's where the $350,000, here's how we plan to spend it. And then have the council in a working session say, yeah, that's a good idea. In this case, it's not a good idea in this case, and we'd like to see most of that money, or at least some of the money, set aside in the capital budget to a designated fund, whatever that fund is.
Sure. So, council's given an opportunity to do a work session, but it wasn't desired. It didn't get a lot of interest to hold that work session. So instead what I did was, for any changes that are included in here, they're in the budget notes, which come after.
Yes, I saw it. I looked at those.
So that's the explanation for why certain items are being proposed. Very little has changed from the introduction of this budget from the January meeting. It's largely the same. The only major changes is that there's a reduction for the parking enforcement staff that we talked about at the meeting, and then I added $43 to one other item, but otherwise it is largely the same. On the operations front, the $46,000 that you mentioned that includes $25,000, so it's not 40.
Oh, I see.
It's 40,
But it's
right.
it's just a different line item. It's 11.2 is 46,000, and then the 25,000 is.
It's like a subcategory?
2.2.
Yeah, it's a subcategory.
Oh, yeah.
These are subcategories. So the explanations for each of them, I walked through them last time. I don't know if that's what council wants me to do again for each item, or if you want to just talk about the specific ones that you had mentioned.
What I would like to see is where did 250 get allocated and broken down, so I can see what it is that
Yeah.
they're proposing to do, rather than putting it into operations. I would very much like to see it in the capital.
So it's both. So of that additional 263, because we already counted for 86,000, that was our initial estimate that we carried over. We knew it would be low, but we didn't want to overestimate what we carried over. So that additional 260,000, we got a year. Yeah, for the carryover, that was then reprogrammed into both operations and capital. So of the operations funds, 31,000, almost 32,000 of that went into the contingency line item, so that's not necessarily slated for any specific expenses. It's there if something comes up, and you would receive notification if that were going to be used for anything. And then the remaining funds were programmed as it shows in the proposed change column. And again, I went through each of those at the last meeting. I can do that again.
Well, I I appreciate the fact that you went through it, but there's a difference between taking this document home and studying it and going through it at a council meeting.
Which is what we did in introduction, but go ahead.
And the fact is that I was out of town for the last 2 weeks, got home late Sunday night, and I figured I'd want to do some work. I basically spent most of the day on this, trying to figure out, where my $350,000 is. And thinking, I wish we'd had a work session with the council so that we can have a philosophical discussion of where excess funding at the end of the year should be allocated if it's available.
I'm sorry, Hans, but I have to interject here. As Andrea described, we already had 83,000 as a proposed carryover at the beginning of the fiscal year. So what got added to that was the 263. So the 83 had already been distributed and approved according to council back when we did this. And then the 263 is actually broken out, and it shows you in the proposed change column where the total is, okay? So I'm on the operating budget. So you can see where this 263 gets distributed, some of it also being distributed directly to capital transfers. And you can turn the page to the capital, and you can see that, to capital and actually operating reserve. And if you recall from the last council meeting, there was a large chunk of 75,000 that was placed and recommended highly by Andrea and her correspondence with Legit to cover anticipated employee leave. So that was about 76,000 there. Okay. We also put a little bit more in for the wind case reimbursement. As we all know, we're going to at some point start having, we'll either be losing revenue and we'll need to draw from that if we want, or if we'll be making direct payments. I do not think we'll be making direct payments. We'll just probably see a little loss in revenue as the state and the county start pulling back a little bit of that. So that, I hope, gives you some explanation. When there was about 30,000 proposed for the traffic enforcement, the council unanimously said to cut it in half, and we discussed where to put that, and everybody agreed that just putting it in the contingency was a good place for now. So that's why you see the contingency on line 17.0 on operations go up a little bit more, as Andrea just said. And then, as she also referenced, her notes really do explain in detail what the additional costs are. And those were there back before the January town council meeting when we actually introduced this. And so, as she said, there was very little change made, and that was all available before the council meeting in January and at the council meeting, and there's just only one little change that she described tonight. So Andrea's willing to go back over those notes and showing you where that is, but that is where you get your total incremental carryover of 263.
I don't want to take up the council's time right now, but I would like to, at some point in the next week, sit down with Andrea and just review this. And again, one of the things that I think we need as a council, and when we have issues like this, to sit down together and to talk about policy guidance that we establish for the town on the basis of which we make these allocations.
Right. I think we agree. And there was an opportunity to have that kind of meeting, but it was, I guess, just decided by council members not to go forward with it. We will be having another budget work session for the new fiscal year coming up for sure.
And I strongly urge that one of the things we do is before we start moving numbers and plugging numbers into a new budget, that we say, what are the things that this council feels are important spends, and
Absolutely.
come up with priorities so that it helps you out in the office, but also so that we can, during the course of the year, can assess whether or not we're sticking with those priorities and how well we do at it, rather than having it appear sort of randomly.
I would have to disagree respectfully that it was appeared randomly, but I agree that I think
Well, I
the
don't-
discussion of policy and budget and funding go together, and that is your task as council members.
I don't mean to say that if you're randomly in negative and pejorative way. I meant to say that, come to the meeting, or if we get the packet on the weekend and look through it, there's a limited amount of time we can put into actually drilling into the numbers over the course of the weekend. Most of us have pretty busy weekend schedules. And say, when I say it appears, I'm saying that it's really difficult to absorb all this information in the weekend.
I'm sorry, it's been available for 40 days. Okay? I just want to put that on the record. It wasn't just this past weekend, okay?
No, I
All right.
understand that.
Well, I know you're sitting, okay,
And I took this with me up to Rhode Island, but I didn't get to it, okay?
but it wasn't just the weekend. It's been available for 40 days for all of you. But duly noted. So where does council want to go now with this? It's on, nobody has made a motion to approve the adoption. Do you want to keep discussing this? Or what would you like to do?
I'll move that we adopt the mid-year, the FY 2020 mid-year capital and operating budget amendment as written.
Is there a second?
Well, I just want to make sure I understand what Hans is requesting. You're requesting more time.
I would like to spend some time that's convenient for Andre to go over this. So yes, that's what I would like to do. I would like to make sure that I know what we're doing here and that it's, that the allocation of resources is right.
Prepared.
Andrea, are there,
The right one from my perspective. And
This was to come up at January council.
so Andrea, another question I have, I guess, in that respect, are there any of these proposed changes that are urgent? In other words, that,
Yes, there's one that's urgent. Part of the contract office assistant is to get some additional support for us for the FY21 budget process. And it would be nice to have that funding approved to be able to move forward with that tomorrow.
and do we have a procurement mechanism in place for that?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I would also note that based on what we've seen, if we're going to hire a parking enforcement officer on March 1st, we're going to need to also have those monies allocated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For IT operations, there's also some steps that we need to take there that we're pretty anxious to get, to do things correctly on that front. External organizations, is probably okay. Insurance, probably okay.
If we're able to get the contract office assistant, will that enable us to move the budget process along at the month earlier pace that we were hoping to, that we discussed last month? There was some email traffic about that.
No, they're separate challenges there in terms of the timeline to be able to do the analysis. But I mean, part of it was that I felt more comfortable having the approval today before officially moving forward with something there in terms of making sure that we're squared away on budget. And also, though, there's still the question of having enough time to do the analysis that council may be looking for, may expect by February 24th.
And we also don't have some of the data,
Yeah, that's right.
the economic data, the property value data from the state. And that doesn't come out till
Mid-March,
Mid-March.
is when some of the
Mhm.
stuff started.
which is how we ended up with a different, the schedule we had last year was because of the same.
And so what has caused us to need the contract assistance for the budget this year, different from, say, last year?
You know, the sidewalk project is a lot of time, and Merrick Heck spent a
Additional
lot of time
contract
doing the
administration.
revenue, projections last year. I focused more on operations and capital, and to be able to, not me to speak for you, but for all the things you have on your plate, the things I have on my plate, there were a lot of late nights last year as a part of it as well, and certainly that happens and it comes up, but if you can plan for it and bring in some help to support you, support us with getting through it, that's certainly preferable.
That's the kind of documentation I would like to see the council have, how many hours are we working in excess. And again, I don't have any problem with any of this.
So in the budget notes, I have
I
contract,
saw, I just looked at it.
support services contract,
But it doesn't say that you're currently working 10 hours a week of overtime or whatever that number is.
I was not planning on documenting my time, Hans, but
Well,
I think Andrea spends a lot more than just 8 hours a day on her work, and I am spending almost 8 hours a day, as some people can attest to, on stuff, and I don't get paid 1 cent. But I was thinking we would ask council if I could get a small stipend, just like all the other mayors do. The majority of mayors in the county, Montgomery County, get paid. Not as a salary, just as a stipend or honorarium. I would be so grateful for that. It would make it feel so much more rewarding.
As I said, I would love, when you're asking for more money to hire us additional staff, if you could just document for us how many hours a day you work and why it's necessary. I'm not against anything, I just want to be able to, if I'm going to vote tax dollars to be directed to this, I want to make sure that I know what it's for. It's as simple as that. I don't think I'm asking for a lot. I want to be assured that we're not spending everybody's money wisely. I don't want to be, that's all. And I'm not mistrusting the judgment. That's not what this is about. This is giving me and giving the rest of the council the comfort level that we need to say, this is a good move. This is a good decision for us. This is a good way to spend our money. That's all.
Just so you know, it's not a new employee, it's just contracted temp help. So it's hourly. Yes, I know, but I'm just, we don't even know yet. We're hoping, because there's background historical data that has to be gathered and formatted and analyzed, and then modeling and projections. So we don't know exactly how many hours it'll be, but we're looking at it for the time frame between, tomorrow and hopefully by the budget work session we have to reschedule to. So we do hope to have that. I don't know how many hours it'll be.
Yeah, I've said enough. I made my.
Just for context too, some of the questions that were asked last year during the budget process, one of the things that came up that was explained was that those are things that of course it's valid analysis, it'd be good analysis to do, but that, it's not like we have a budget analyst, like some of our, some larger cities do. And so we sort of did the best we could with the time that we have and with the bandwidth that we have. So if that additional analysis is needed, this is sort of what we need to be able to provide that analysis. If that additional analysis is not needed and something you just want more of a straightforward, based on last year or something, maybe some small changes to what was done last year, that can be done, but it's not going to be the level of analysis that was requested last year.
Because I won't do it.
So the budget work session on February 24th is an announced public meeting, but it is not normally a meeting where we pass budget actions, right? So we wouldn't be able to table this today till then, we'd have to table it till March, is that correct?
And also, we're going to be rescheduling that budget work session because we won't have enough analysis done for you because we won't even have the economic data. That's why we're using the same schedule. We're reverting back to the same schedule we had last year.
Mhm.
You know, there's a lot of data that we have to get from the state, and we haven't got it yet. They haven't put it out. It has to do with tax rates, and so forth, property assessments, so forth.
So you're expecting that, at least this new assistant will be part-time, but for a year?
No,
Well, if you multiply out the numbers, that's what you end up with.
right, it would, the reality is that that will be, that will likely be smaller than that, depending on the number of hours per week, of course, but it won't be the full fiscal year. I mean, this would be at most through June 30th, or June, actually, would have been the second Monday in June is. 'Cause that would be the last, sort of the last point at which to adopt.
I'm sorry, this amount would pay for the assistant to work more hours per week than originally planned, or?
No, you had asked for it to be cut in half, and at the time that it was, the number was.
Oh, no, that's the parking assistant. We're still talking about the budget
That was my fault. sorry.
assistant, right?
For the budget assistant, this would be more than just this project. Sorry, I mixed up the two things. So for the budget assistant, you know, this could be used in part for the budget assistant, or I had in here as another example, town communications. So Dan has mentioned, you know, having somebody to assist with communication stuff, or it could be used for the code. We've in the town office made some changes already to the code, but there's some other analysis that may need to be done that, for example, former town manager may be able to come on and help with some of that, right? So there's some other types of projects that this could be used for. I mean, if this person is, you know, depending on the number of hours per week and the number of weeks, but if we're not near that, it's not like we're going to feel like we need to spend up that, you know, and I think that's how we've always felt and always shown how we manage the budget.
Right. It's, you know, it allows Andrea to get done, you know, some of her goals and objectives that even the council had wanted when they hired her, by getting us, you know, additional help so that these things get done. It's not just the budget, it's, as she said, other objectives in the office that someone else can be doing while she's also doing her other work.
So we're still talking about 11.2.2.
Yeah.
Right, the
Okay.
office assistant.
So this person or persons, depending on how it works out, would still be one part-time equivalent for a full year, basically. I mean, it's 52 weeks worth of,
It depends on how you look at it, because there could be different functions that are being served, right? So one person may be working on something related to the budget. I don't think we would have the capacity while doing the budget to also be finishing out the code updates, right? But in theory, you could have overlapping people. It wouldn't necessarily be the same support service individuals, right?
It's not that we're getting a half of a person's
Right.
time for a full year.
No,
We're getting a
these are
certain
small-
number of
these are
hours
small
that we
projects.
could use.
Yeah, yeah. And the one that we know that we need right now is budget. Like, that's the more urgent one in terms of timeliness, in terms of where there's really a gap, in terms of our bandwidth.
so in theory, you could have multiple people at one time.
Theory.
Theory, but I think that might be hard to manage.
So, so the concern is if we don't pass this amendment now, we won't have that contract support to help us with the budget work that we do need to have done now. And then, I'm sorry, what was the other more urgent item that you mentioned?
IT
The
is
IT.
other one that, yeah,
We are at a place with IT, you can describe more, Andrea, but, you know, we procured a new server and got things a little bit more stabilized and accessible by all staff that had never been accessible before. But that was, you know, initial setup. We're at a point now where we actually need some kind of support service maintenance program. We don't have that, even though by the goodwill of Island Joe, they've been providing some, but they keep saying, we need the support service contract if we're gonna be doing this ad hoc work and, monthly, maintenance and upgrades, all of that. And that's what this IT is. It also ensures, the appropriate cybersecurity controls are maintained and updated as necessary. And we don't have any of that right now. We have an initial, but we don't have anything else. So.
Yeah, no, that's.
All right.
So there's still a motion on the table.
So the
Is there a
concern
second?
so the concern I have before we go there, Hans, is if we delay this till March, we won't provide the additional assistance to help us get more budget analysis that we need for next year's budget. So I feel like we're in a bit of a pickle, timing-wise.
Well, I'm willing to agree to that, but I would like to have some time. to really talk about that. No other way to understand better, on the summary sheet. Here's the total number of dollars that we had in excess of what we had projected. Here's how much proposed and spent, broken down, on this other sheet of paper so we know, so we can follow the dollars. That's all.
And
So-
between now and March, I'd also like to encourage all council members to be thinking about the priorities for FY '21. So that when we do sit down, you'll maybe have had some time to reflect on what you think your priorities are and how we fund them. So just in terms of preparedness, to do a little homework on your own. Okay?
So in light of that, I would like to make a second the motion to pass the budget amendment.
Okay. Seconded by Jerry Lee. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So approved.
So going back to the February 24th work session, I would like to ask that we consider whether, given how much work we clearly need to do on the budget and the time that we need to devote to setting priorities, is there any benefit to still meeting without the additional data? When you look at the agenda, do you have to have the data in front of us in order to get through some of the work that we need to do? Or could we split it in half so that we could spread this out a little bit rather than putting it off, which I think we all know what will happen if we just put it off. We'll put the whole thing off, right? So just something to think about in terms of how we scheduled it. I find it hard to believe that we couldn't make some progress on this before we had that data, but I'm not entirely sure. This is my first round.
Well, I would tend to agree with you because I think that, based on what some of the notes that Hans has brought up, it would be nice that if there's things that we have questions on that require research, we'd be able to loop back and catch them on the second round. The first round could be to go over everything, and then if it turns out that we need more information or more details, then we have a second meeting in order to clean up the details and go forward.
Well, I can definitely see your points. We won't have any data for you, but if we want to sit down and just have a discussion on what your priorities are and, what you're seeing in your monthly reports as the point in time, that's fine. But we're not going to have the data that we had last year when we had some of the analysis, some trend analysis, limited, and, some projections. None of that will be available to you.
No, but we can still discuss I understand that, I should say, but we can still discuss philosophical points about the an overarching budget, and is this where we think we really want to go, and so on and so forth.
All right, so we will have a framework to work with. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that we can then put the data into once we have it. I think that would be helpful for me.
All right, so we're going to keep with the February 24th work
Should I
session.
go ahead and schedule the second one now? then, right? I mean, I'll send out a doodle with the schedule.
Okay, we are on to new business. And we have a presentation by our town archivist, Claire McDonald, on the archives retention schedule update.
Good evening. So I'm a former Fed, so please bear with me. I have my written statement, but then I'll open it up for questions. So as Khaki mentioned, I'm Claire McDonald. I'm the contract town archivist. I've been here since June 2019, so just over 6 months. And tonight I want to give you a brief update on managing official records and the role of the archives in that. In December 2019, the Maryland State Archivist approved our town's records retention schedule. The schedule is required by Maryland state law, and it lists and describes all the types of records that the town creates, receives, and maintains during the course of conducting official town business. The approved schedule provides for the permanent retention of records deemed to have lasting value, as well as the destruction of records that are no longer essential to town operations. You have a copy of the summary, hopefully, in front of you. The town's record retention schedule includes 25 record series or categories. The actual schedule is about 25 pages long. That's why you have a summary. And the categories are things such as general correspondence, town council meeting minutes, and general accounting records. Of the 25 records, 11 have been deemed permanent and must be kept. So for example, you must keep all legal records such as legal opinions. The remaining 14 record series have been designated as non-permanent, but still have to be retained for a certain period of time, typically anywhere from 6 months to 50 years, depending on the type of record, and then they can be destroyed. It's important to understand that all Garrett Park employees and elected officials share responsibility in protecting town records, ensuring that the records are available to the public and future decision makers, and following state records management requirements. I've provided you all with that summary, and it includes the record series, the types of records included in each series, and that may not be complete, by the way. It's comprehensive as I could make it, but there may be new projects or that we would add records to different categories. And then it also includes the retention requirements. So the town archives here in Garrett Park really wears two hats, if you will. The first is we serve as Garrett Park's records management center. And that is we store and manage the inactive records of the town, and we support the town office with public information requests. We also are responsible for implementing the records retention schedule, and I coordinate with the state archives as needed. As the Government Records Management Center, we must follow state laws and regulations. In addition to that, though, we're also an archive that serves the community by preserving the town's history through papers, photographs, oral histories, memorabilia, and other materials donated by town residents, citizen clubs and organizations, and others. So as a community archive, we should adhere to archival standards and codes and ethical codes and practices. Since becoming the town archivist, I've been working to really clearly define these two roles to ensure that we are both good stewards of the town's records as well as preserving the town's history. I'm also keenly aware, though, that how intertwined these roles are, because many of your town records are integral to telling the story or the history of Garrett Park. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm happy to address any questions you may have about the town's records retention schedule.
Thank you, Claire. Anybody have any questions?
What do you do about fire protection for the records? I mean, we keep them here.
So the records are, the archive is located behind the post office. Right now, we don't have any additional special fire protection. We have certainly the sprinkler system in the building. We have, the alert, smoke detectors, and things like that. But there is no special storage that the records are in. Prior to me getting here, a number of records have been digitized. And so if there were a fire or records got damaged from smoke or water or actual fire damage, while you would lose a tremendous amount, some of your records have been digitized. But the risk there is making sure that those are backed up properly and having the support for digital records. It's not a fail-safe, solution.
What does the state require in that regard?
In regard to fire protection so what you're doing, actually, we're meeting state requirements there. So the state requires that you have smoke detectors. At some point, we probably should have some additional ones in the archive. It requires a sprinkler system, which you do have. So you're meeting that piece of the state requirement for fire protection. Unfortunately, there's no foolproof 100% guarantee. As you may have read recently, the records of the Chinese immigration experience up in New York City, they recently had a large fire. What I'm hearing just through kind of the network of archivists is that not as many of the records got destroyed as they had originally thought, but it will be a very long process to recover the records because your biggest risk is not necessarily having them burnt up. The bigger risk is having water damage or smoke damage.
Are any of these records also sent in parallel to the state archives?
So currently, none of your records have been sent to the state archives. We have in the records retention schedule that option to do that. At some point, I think the goal that was set for this archive is to have it designated as an official local archive that permits you to keep all of your permanent town records. You don't have that designation right now. Interestingly enough, though, it's not because of fire suppression or that type of thing. It's more because of environmental temperature and humidity control issues in the archive.
But, so once we go to, if we're designated a local archive, will we still send things to the state?
No, you wouldn't have to. No. If by being a designated local archive, and that's something only the state archivist can do, and it's a formal process to get that designation, that would permit you to keep all of your permanent records. You would still destroy records that are no longer needed, and there's, that option, but your permanent records that you've deemed as having either historic or administrative value, you would continue to keep in the local archive.
But we would still have the risk of whatever fire, what?
Very much so, yes. I will say, as an archivist, I do get concerned that you are in a building under a restaurant. That would not be my first choice of a location for an archive.
Or and next to a train track.
Right, that's true, yeah. But I think I'm more concerned about the restaurant just as a more likely risk versus the railroad.
Most certainly.
So are the digital records backed up to an off-site location?
Yeah, so we are now doing that. Before I got here, a lot of the records got digitized, and they were backing them up on external hard drives. but only one hard drive at a time. So one of the things I've initiated is Andrea recently approved the purchase of an additional external hard drive. Fortunately, the price has gone down on those. And so now I have a rotating. So I have 3 external hard drives that I rotate and do backups on. And for lack of another location, I actually bring one home with me, and I have it in a fireproof box at my home. And each week, when I do a small update each week, and then every 2 to 3 weeks, I do a 100% backup of everything, and I switch out the hard drives to do that.
How long does that take, Claire, a backup, a full 100% backup?
Actually, surprisingly, it doesn't, it's not something that like takes overnight. It's usually, it might be a couple hours. We have a lot of digital images, and so those are huge files. But it actually goes pretty quickly when I do the backup.
And to get the archive on the server, well, I mean, server needs better backup than what the situation we have right now, but different conversation. To get the archive on the server, we need a new computer in the archive. So all these things are related to the mid-year budget as well. So all part. We didn't realize that the computer that you had down there was as rough as it was until we had some challenges with it last.
Right,
month.
right. Fortunately, we have not lost anything. We did have a challenge with that computer, but no data got lost, and we plan to continue that.
So I have one more follow-up question for you, Claire. On the charter and ordinances, amendments, it says, they're permanent, and, we retain for 50 years. Now, have these not been sent to the state?
They have not. So your town has kind of been keeping everything. In fact, this is the first records retention schedule that I'm aware of you having. And that was something that, was initiated with the previous town manager and archivist, and jumped on when Andrea came here, and it was my first assignment when I got here. So as a result of not having a records retention schedule, you are also not sending anything to the Maryland State Archives. We didn't want to, the reason you're seeing things like we're going to hold on to it 50 years, was my fear when I look at your archive is it's a wonderful resource. You have incredible records there. And if I had put a normal 3 or 7 year retention, what would have happened is your archive would have been cleared out very quickly with us having to pack everything up and send it to the state archives. We want to avoid that. So when I got involved in this process, I actually called the state archives and said, help me. What can we do to preserve the history of this town, make it readily accessible to the residents of the town, but still comply with state law? And they were the ones who worked with me on that 50-year so that we can keep it here. We're the stewards of it, but unless we become a designated archive, we will at some point have to send records to the state archives.
Are we still digitizing things?
We are not right now, and the reason for that is, one, I wanted to deal with the backup, but digitizing is not as simple as just putting something on a scanner. In the archive world, there really is a process for ensuring we're capturing all the metadata that goes along with that when we're digitizing in formats that are not necessarily application specific. We want to be able to access those records 5, 10, 15 years from now. So if Microsoft Word is gone, in 5, 10 years, we want to make sure that we have digitized things in formats that aren't going to become obsolete. And it also means anytime you digitize, you have to have a maintenance program in place because things do go obsolete. And so if we're going to digitize all of our photographs, we have to have a plan in place for 5 years from now, revisiting what we've digitized, Are the formats still formats that are going to be accessible, or do we need to update and change? So it's not as simple as just scanning things.
Makes sense.
So,
Thank you for
All
your.
right.
Well, actually, before you leave, you want to discuss, I know we're also doing, you mentioned in the report doing, well, Karen did doing some Archives 101 and a few other.
Oh, yes, thank you for, so yes, one of my goals in the archives is doing more outreach, making people aware that we have a town archives, it's unique. So I'm offering 2 sessions in February, 2 Saturdays, the 22nd and the 29th. The first session on Archives 101 really covers some of the basic, what is an archives, what is it all about, what's so special about the Garrett Park Archives, and we'll highlight some of your collections. And then the second session on the 29th is what I call Preservation 101. And so it talks a little bit about what we're doing in the archives to preserve documents, how do you preserve paper and photographs, things like that. It will also provide tips and techniques on preserving your own family records and items that might eventually at some point be donated to us or some other archive or repository. So thank you.
Okay, another item under new business is the compost service options from Councilmember Bennett.
All right, thank you. Last month, resident Jennifer Liebrick made a residence presentation asking the town to consider adding compost pickup service as part of our current garbage and recycling collections. I offered to help gather information about this, and I worked with Ms. Liebrick over the last month, and we sought some cost information from, we reached out to 3 different providers. We heard back from 2 different ones. And it's a range from if we just getting a discount for residents who opt in to a service, which actually I think some residents get that now. They get a discount from Compost Crew if they participate because the town has enough residents who participate on their own, to a full subsidy where the town would be paying for service and every resident would get a bucket and be able to get theirs picked up once a week. I'm not going to put the prices out there right now because we're still in the initial stages of gathering information. But in talking to a few other residents about this, Ms. Liebrich did reach out to the Conservation Action Network, but we haven't really been able to establish full contact there. We're not really sure if it's a fully active committee. So if anyone has information on that, I'd appreciate getting more information about who the current contacts are. But in talking to a few residents about this, I was just trying to gauge interest. It sounds like it might be a good idea to do some sort of survey to find out what interest level there is in town, because I don't want to promote the town taking on this additional service without really knowing what level of interest we have amongst the residents. So I just wanted to let you know where we stand with our research, and also to just check in. I'm assuming the town doesn't necessarily have a survey mechanism in place for this kind of survey. Is it something that maybe we would ask the Citizens Association to consider taking on if we are not able to get the Conservation Action Network to undertake a survey? I'm not sure of some of the mechanisms that have been used to gauge this kind of interest in the past. So I just thought I would put that out for discussion.
The website has a survey function.
Ah, okay. And is it,
Speaking on behalf of GPCAN.
aha, thank you, Joanne. Yeah, come to the mic.
At Jennifer Liebrick's suggestion, about 2 years ago, we did a composting presentation as part of a Citizens Association meeting. Compost Crew and another company came, and also Alan Pulchinievich, who works for the county Solid Waste Liaison, came. So we have a bunch of materials from that presentation, obviously 2 years ago, and at the time, the county was about to unveil a composting plan for the county. So we kind of were waiting to see what the county plan was. The county plan did come out in January. I tried to read it, it's about 100 pages, so I don't really remember that it had any action items. It's like, looks like they're trying to find a facility and they don't really have a plan yet. So GP Kane could do a survey. We're not that active, we're not meeting regularly, but we know that there's a number of people who pay privately for the service. We could put together a survey.
Right.
But there is a function with the town website to do surveys. Oh, Joanne Schmader. I live on Kenilworth.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think residents who are currently paying for it themselves are paying possibly around $384 a year at $32 a month, depending upon whether they're getting a discount. One of the companies said that they offer a discount if you have 10 or more for $25 a month, which would be somewhat less than that. Well, I really think if we want to offer either a subsidy or any kind of subsidized service beyond the discount, we should definitely do some sort of survey. So I'll follow up with Joanne afterwards about what kind of both website and possible surveys that we could conduct so that we could get more information about the interest level we have in town. But there are at least 3 companies out there that service this area, and in addition to the pickup, they then offer back the soil in bags to the residents who participate.
Is that part of the same fee?
Yes,
Really?
it's all part of the service.
Okay, good.
Mhm. So that's all I have on that for now. We'll keep looking into it.
Great, very helpful, thanks. Did, you had mentioned about having Mary at some point come and do a presentation. I'm guessing you'd
Right.
rather wait until we get more
Okay,
data, or?
so turning now to the pesticide law, you mean? Okay. So for the second item on the agenda, the county
Yes, we
reached out. I'm
Sorry.
sorry, we've moved on to the
Under-
next item of
under
the
new
agenda, right?
business, we're on the third item, Montgomery County Code, Chapter 33B, pesticides. Jerry Lee, take
Right.
it over.
Thank you. So there was a presentation from the county. They're available on the table. If you didn't pick it up, you could pick it up now. So the town, the county reached out to us to remind us that the county's new pesticide law went into effect in June of 2019, or fully into effect. And Garrett Park is currently exempted because we have not yet opted in to the county's provisions. And if you look through this, it explains what the provisions are in a general sense. Essentially, the pesticide or the pesticides or the combined weed and feed, which is a pesticide combined with fertilizer, materials that are not organic are no longer allowed in Montgomery County at large or in any of its parks or child care facility grounds. So, and it shows here in a couple of slides on page 3, you'll see it shows what is allowed or what is not allowed, and then what is allowed, and there are certain labels that, that it provides. And the point for Garrett Park is that right now, theoretically, these synthetic pesticides could be used within Garrett Park by residents and by landscaping companies other than on public properties. And it would be okay because we've not opted in. However, if we opt in, all enforcement would be the same in Garrett Park as it is elsewhere in the county. The county does all enforcement and information. The town would simply have to promote information about what the law is and point people to the county information sites. Can you use the... I'm not sure what so the question was, what is the enforcement mechanism? They have a service center where people can report violations. I'm not actually sure what the fines are that are involved. I believe it's a fine-based enforcement. And there are a lot of exemptions, so I think in terms of people thinking about how this would apply to them personally, if you look at slide 8, there are a lot of exemptions for noxious weeds, for controlling invasive species, disease vectors, and biting and stinging insects. So for individual residents, if they had these issues, they could still use these kind of pesticides for these purposes. They would be exempted, even if we opted in.
What about for the town or other organizations that are not individual residents?
Such as the pool.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be an important thing for us to keep in mind. This would apply to, once we adopted it, it would apply to the pool. So we need to make sure that if we decide to consider this, that we talk with the pool management so they understand how the implications would apply to them. I do believe this would apply to them, but the exemptions would apply as well.
Okay,
And
so-
probably most pesticide use that the pool uses now apply to the biting and insects.
The biting and stinging insects.
The biting and stinging insects. But I think they, well, anyway, I don't know what they use now.
Follow-up question. Elizabeth Henley,
Thank you.
Kenilworth Avenue. Wells Park and the tennis courts and basketball court are Montgomery County owned. So how is that affected by?
Those are already covered by the county and state law.
They are.
So they are already on the more controlled plan.
Quick question, Jerry Lee. If there is some kind of a penalty fee that the county might charge for a violation, I mean, you don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the violations are dealt with.
Let's suppose that they may have them, and we haven't opted in. Would the council be interested if we do our own version and then we impose a penalty? So we have a revenue, so it's a revenue stream for us? I mean, I don't even know how you would.
Who's going to adjudicate it? That's,
Yeah, I'm not sure that the effort to enforce that would be worth the,
Who's going to really have the expertise to recognize different packages of powder or whatever that's fine. The county enforces it, I would strongly inquire about what the enforcement mechanism is, whether they collect dollars for it, and if we can share that revenue.
yeah.
So I didn't want to take up a lot of time today. I wanted to get this issue out there for the council to consider for potential drafting of a resolution that could be introduced at a future council meeting for actual consideration. And our contact at the county, Mary Travaglini, has offered to come and speak with us at a future date. She can come in March at to the council meeting if we'd like. So I wanted to get it out there, get people thinking about it for potential drafting of a resolution. If there's an interest to draft a resolution, I could work with Andrea on that.
I would strongly support that.
Do we have any, I went to look this up the other day, and all I could find was like the header information. Is there a website or something that actually has what the real law is?
Right, yeah. I had a similar experience trying to find information, which is why I really think it would be helpful to have Mary come and give us more information. I also asked her if she could get us some more additional resources
Okay.
to use.
Yeah, if you could even just give us what the, what the code is, or the spot we need to look at, because, yeah, all it lists is, if you're a retailer, well, we don't always sell the stuff here. So,
I think it's code 33.
Yeah, it's this 33D.
right,
It
if
is
you
hard
look
to
up
find.
33B,
It's not there?
no, it's there, but all it talks about is retailers and repackaging and some other stuff. It doesn't mention a thing about, not putting it on your yard. Now, maybe I went to the wrong spot. I don't know. I just Googled it, came up with the number.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Tried it.
that easy to click and find what you're looking for. So I do think it would be helpful for
That would be
Mary to
great.
help us with the resources there,
That would be great,
for the
thanks.
actual law.
And Jerry, as the liaison to the Arboretum Committee, I would guess that you're going to work with them for this too, get some input from them.
Sure, I think that's a good idea. Mhm. Okay, so given that there seems to be an interest, I'll follow up with Andrea and with Ms. Travellini, and we'll invite her to the March meeting.
Yeah, if you can get something ahead of time.
Thank you.
Anything, if you can pass on something ahead of time so I
we
can
get
talk to
more
the
of the-
pool.
Yes.
I mean, I think they're probably okay. I don't think there's an issue, but just to be sure.
Right. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mary Lou. It's really informative. Okay, we're on to town updates. And first on the list is the Safe Routes to School project. So, what can I tell you? You all know that the limit of disturbance stakes have been placed, and that's just the work area for which the construction crews are allowed room to navigate as they excavate and do root pruning, whether it's by hand or with a little wheel saw, or it's placing the forms for the sidewalks and also pouring the concrete. So, you know, they needed more room than just a 4 feet width sidewalk, hence the LOD stakes that are marked. You are probably aware that root pruning had been done, and interestingly, the root pruning, which is by hand or by small wheel saw, is really done primarily to prevent the excavating machine from snagging roots as it's digging the trench for the sidewalk and pulling more of the plant or larger roots with it out of the ground. So they actually are doing this cutting of these roots by hand or by small wheel saw, you know, further away than just in the 4 feet width area of the sidewalk. So that's been done. The tree protection fencing has gone up, and with all things go, if weather obliges and temperature, and subcontractors stay on schedule, because it's hurting a bunch of subcontractors to be ready to come, we are looking at starting the actual excavation on the 18th of February. That would be next week, that's Tuesday. And I will be putting something out to the whole town, but just wanted you all to know, you know, it may take a few days. You know, we're not really trying to lock into dates, because you just never know what happens. But it could take a few days to get the excavation done. And then what follows is more hand pruning with, you know, not necessarily the trencher, but actually hand pruning along the excavated trench. If the excavation team encounters more roots, you never know what you're going to encounter, and they would come in and do that. There's also air spading for anything over, I think, an inch thick root. So they have an air spade machine, which is really just a hose of air, and they're just blowing air. And that moves the soil away from the roots without cutting them. After that, they would then come in with the aggregate base and the forms for the concrete, and then the concrete. So we're talking roughly, you know, 9, 10 calendar days to have that from start to finish. They've also, Patriot, the construction lead on this, the construction company lead, has also decided that now, instead of 200 feet test case, that they're going to try block to block. And they think that this is just going to be easier on residents, because what will happen in this first block, which is between Weymouth and Keswick, for the next couple weeks, the road will be closed during the workday, during the working hours of the construction crews. this will also mean that while the road, that block will be open to residents who live on that block, they cannot park their cars during the day on the block, either side of the street. They can't park there. It's just too skinny. And with all that's going on with the machinery, they won't have, the construction crews won't have room to work. So that means that the residents would have to park their cars if they're home during the day, around the block. However, after the crews are finished for the day, homeowners can then get their cars and bring them up and park them on the curb. They cannot use their driveway. They're not going to be able to use their driveway for anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, because it will take maybe up to 2 weeks for the concrete to harden, to set enough for the driveway, the passage of the sidewalk through the driveway, for that to harden and support the vehicle as it goes over that sidewalk. So that's the first, even though it's not as small a test case as we thought, it's more, a block. Once that gets completed, they will already be on to excavating the next block, which would be Keswick to Shelley. So you're going to start seeing a rolling work, rolling of different activities going on, whereas this first block, they are doing start to finish. You'll see the excavation, air spading, and the concrete being poured. After that, they will start rolling, one block at a time. They'll get excavating. Then that excavation moves on to the next block, and then at the same time, you'll have air spading going on the previous block. So it's just going to be a continuation, rolling effort of work going after this first block is done. And let's just hope we keep seeing some spring weather. That's all I have. Any questions?
I was just wondering if the notification that's gone to the residents on Oxford Street gave them this level of detail about the property access.
I have the letter written and ready to go. I just wanted
Okay.
to bring it up here at the council
Okay.
first, and then I probably will send it out tomorrow. And then Patriot will also follow with another notice of their own with similar information. I
To
know-
that end, are we going to be able to tow cars?
What'd you say?
Will we tow cars?
Tow cars?
In other words, yeah, somebody leaves their car parked in the way.
Yeah, I'll have to do something, unless they actually can try to maneuver around the car. All of this is a sort of a preventive measure, safety issue. I can't tell you whether there's going to be such number of, large truck equipment machines on the road, or for how long, and, how many at one time, that it would, really prevent doing any work if there's a car anyway. I can't tell you that. So it'll
No,
play by ear.
I understand that, but I'm looking at if, do we have a provision in place? Have we thought about what we would do?
I haven't.
I think with our enforcement, we could, yeah.
What have we done in the past when we've done road paving? Has it been an issue? When we've done road paving in the past, has it been an issue? Paving. Right,
Resurfacing, yeah.
right. If we've been resurfacing and somebody left a car, how did we deal with it?
I think maybe once or twice, but essentially it's not a problem, people are very confident, as long as they've been notified and adequately, and it's been underscored that you need to leave your car somewhere else. In this case, you just leave it across the street.
No,
Around the corner,
Across the street, okay.
no, nobody can park on the street
Keswick Street.
during the day.
They can park on Keswick Street
Or wait.
or Wayne. There you go.
Eileen Kelly, Kenilworth Avenue. Are we replacing the piece of sidewalk on Oxford between Kenilworth and Montrose? Like that first block from the school?
No, we are replacing the asphalt path that exists on Montrose from the corner of Oxford, the perpendicular to Montrose, up to the corner of Oxford and Montrose, but we're not taking the rest of that asphalt sidewalk from the corner of Montrose and Oxford all the way down to Kenilworth. We're not doing
Okay,
that.
good. No, I was just concerned about the people leaving school after drop-off must make a right, and if you,
Right.
got,
And you just reminded me, thank you. We will have to notify the school.
That's a good point.
Let them know. The meetings remember to do that, so thank you for reminding me.
So the only other question I had, Kaki, is the overall schedule. Where do we stand currently?
You know, we are still looking at possibly finishing really by the end of May. There'll be a punch list, so, you know, final invoices and stuff may be hopefully done by June 5th. That was the last day on the schedule. You know, there was a lot of wiggle room built into that project schedule, as we all now know. So the end hasn't changed. We are working with Patriot, the prime contractor, to make the formal request to us for a no-cost time extension, because we already are beyond what the original project period was supposed to be. And we've been advised by State Highway to get that in as soon as possible, because it could take a few weeks. So that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Stephen is out, so we will not have a discussion on land use.
And there is nothing going for us from our task force that was reported last month.
No.
Change, so that would be.
Okay. What? I'm sorry. Oh, sorry.
I'm Joanne Schmader again. So I had a question. I'm here tonight because of the accessory dwelling unit discussion. So I would just want to know, where are we with that? Is this something, I know the Land Use Committee met, and there was some discussion of options, but is it going to be presented as a policy or a new ordinance, or is there some discussion that's available for residents?
I might answer unless somebody else wants to. Where we left this in January is, Stephen, the objective would be to amend the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, to be a little bit more flexible for certain corner lots. That said, it also will envelop, some of this ordinance would also envelop where the town wants to stand with ADUs. And that said, Stephen had planned to put the proposal out, the pros and cons, on the website for residents to read and review and have some follow-up discussion. We haven't seen that yet, and without him being here, I don't think I can say anymore unless somebody else wants to.
I think he was planning to send something tomorrow, so maybe keep an eye out.
Are you sick today? It's not like it.
Yeah, he's been out sick, so it may not be this week after all.
But we had discussions about whether it should require public meetings. The process.
And so where Stephen, and I think Stephen was coming from, and, I agree with Hans too, and Stephen was saying, well, let's put it on the website, see if it resonates and raises questions by the residents, and then go from there. So first step was just to post it, see what interest comes up. Okay, we are now at traffic and parking. Phil?
So I think basically not a lot has moved, other than that there's been a job description put out, been internally circulated for review. And I think that now I just finished my input, but I know that Kaki's got to finish. Well, you did finish yours too, so it's just up to you and Andrea to look at. And then we'll need to have the, authorization of the budget to be able to even hire a person, so until we resolve this, well, I guess now we've resolved the mid-year budget, so we're basically at the point that we can hire somebody. I guess the next thing's gonna be posting and then starting the interviews, or with a company or person, depending on how it works out.
Right, you know, we
And,
can, sorry, Phil.
oh, and then I was gonna say, and then some setting of hours and so on and so forth.
So I would imagine that your traffic advisory committee, traffic and parking, would like maybe to be part of the interview, and that,
I shall ask them tonight and see what they say. I guess that'll depend too on when the interviews are gonna be, because at least a bunch of us work, so.
oh, yeah, I think that, you can find.
I'm sorry, hiring someone to do what?
Traffic enforcement, or I'm sorry, parking enforcement, part-time parking enforcement person.
And the county has delegated that to us and will be issuing us citation booklets.
Yep.
And this enforcement officer would also represent the town if there's some appeal in the county court. They would go down and represent us.
Right.
And we would get a small share of revenue from this. We're splitting this, the revenue sharing with the county by having them provide us with the adjudication type service. They're getting a cut of our revenue, put it that way. We aren't expecting a lot of revenue.
No,
And the phase-in plan,
we haven't really set that up yet, so get that.
There's some notices that I should review with you, some
Okay.
language for notices and for warning folks that are both parked in illegal spots right now,
Right.
and also just general notices, to send the language to you to review.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, thank you. And Jerry Lee on the Arboretum.
sure.
Train crossing, train whistle.
That's
So
right, we added that.
I have it here, train,
So-
crossing, and whistle, yes.
Yeah, so we discussed a bunch of it both through the citizens, residents' presentations, and also there's been several people, I've corresponded with a couple different people regarding this, and I'll now actually have a little better update. I will try and talk with some people to see what we can do about reclassifying the crossing, because that would help considerably. If I can get that, manage to pull that one off, then I think we'll be able to change things significantly. And, I will add that basically, no matter if you have a quiet zone or not, if the engineer sees a person or animal on the tracks, or near the tracks, they can use the horn if necessary to alert them.
My
So-
understanding too is that as long as you have a passenger station, that you can't get a quiet zone. So maybe some different things that are happening there with the road, public versus private access, and what can happen there versus having a passenger station.
I will check on that, because I'll tell you what, I read an article not that long ago. As a matter of fact, it was actually related to the situation we have here, where they had BNSF had a problem with their mapping, because there's an internal map on the train that actually says when to blow the horn, and they had the map misprogrammed, and so it was blowing through stations and causing problems, but they got that fixed. So I'm gonna have to look and see if, I'm sure that it allows some stuff, some normal signals and so forth, but it's just the normal grade crossing signal may not have to be used.
Like Forest Glen was brought up at the last meeting. So the reason that could be a quiet zone is because there's not a passenger train station there, right? Whereas like Kensington wouldn't be possible there because that's a passenger.
It was
But they just, Bill just said that they,
Kensington was, yeah.
From CSX, the person I talked to at CSX. The FRA, when FRA got the email, they sent it to CSX, and CSX called me. So
Okay.
I'll forward you what I have.
oh, great, thanks.
Yeah. I haven't talked to Mark, though, so I have no idea how this shakes out with different folks that use the tracks, too. I don't know if
Right.
we're going to get different answers, so.
Okay, that was,
Oh, Phil, I wanted to ask you, your opinion there on the southbound side versus the northbound where you've got, so you've got the sharp curve at the last minute.
Well, that blind curve has always been, I call it a blind curve, but it's always been a concern to me because if the train's coming around that blind curve heading toward Rockville from, say, DC,
You're gonna catch it.
you're going to end up with it.
It's gonna be in your line.
Yep. And if you can see, if they can see it, it will hit you, pretty much the way it works. So that's one concern that we'll have.
Okay.
But they don't always blow, because I mean, since my house is right there, I mean, the first spot where there's a whistle marker, not everybody honks at that spot.
It's very strange.
So
Yeah,
some
coming-
people do and some don't.
Coming down north, heading south, they do.
If they come towards DC, yeah, a lot of times they do. And then of course, they're always blowing for Randolph Road and that area up further, but not everybody blows for that blind curve in there.
Keep in mind, you're talking residents and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Arboretum Committee. So the Arboretum Committee met in January after taking a little bit of a winter break after the release of the comprehensive Arboretum plan in October. And as you might imagine, a lot of the focus of their work right now is on implementation of the plan. Phil Normandy is working with Andrea in the town office on upkeep of the database that was created through the comprehensive plan. It does seem that validating that database that the contractors put together and keeping it up to date will require a certain level of effort. So the committee is working on updating their a budget proposal. There is a small amount that is designated for the committee's work normally, but they think they might, at least initially through this validation period, need an increase. So they are working on that. They
And
also,
with justification, right? I mean.
yes, they're putting the whole thing together, exactly. They also are working on updates to their website, or not their website, their pages on the town's website, and they've been vetting those. I would think that they should be ready to provide to the town if they haven't yet within a few weeks. So they're pretty close. They should be more user-friendly, make the map access to the new geocoded tree feature on the website more accessible. So right now, you can, on your phone, we practiced it during the meeting. You can go to the town's website, click, 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 and you can find the trees in front of your house and the numbers and everything. So they're trying to make sure that all of that is a little more accessible than it currently is. So that should be available in a couple of weeks. And this month, February is the last month that Michael Spector will be on the committee. So he'll be retiring as chair, and they will elect a new chair to start in March. And so thank you to Michael for his service. I'm not even sure how many years of service he's had on the board. It's been quite a few.
At least half a dozen, if not more.
At least half a dozen or not more.
We still stay on the committee?
No, he is rotating off the committee, and I believe when you extended his term, you had already replaced him, right, on the committee, so I'm not actually sure about that. I don't think he's creating a vacancy. I thought there was already replacement made, but maybe we could double check that, Andrea,
Yeah.
just to make sure.
Yeah, I think we managed to make it all work.
It seemed all very complex, the
Yeah.
staggering of the committee terms.
Yeah, we'll have to chat.
Okay,
Remember.
all right, that's all I have.
And I'll make sure you get a copy of that, the membership
The phase.
schedule for
Sure.
appointments.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry Lee. And Andrea, we have that town manager report.
Yes. The January revenues, operations, and capital budgets were at expected levels. Total revenues and expenses are within projections. There were 3 permits from the last meeting, 3 approved permits. One is a 2-story addition at 10930 Claremont. That's a renewal. The other is a second-floor addition and first-floor renovations at 10909 Claremont. The other is a covered back porch at 4605 Oxford. In the town office and maintenance highlights, I'd say the two things of most interest is probably that the new light poles were finally ordered, so that's good. That's gotten straightened out. And then there's new owners at 11112 Kenilworth, which has been of much discussion over the last couple meetings. And then we're closed on President's Day, but trash and recycling are picked up on a normal schedule. I think to mention there. And that's it for me.
I can attest to the, the aware of the town permit requirements and so forth for the old house that was, in great disrepair, the 11112 Kenilworth, that they have covered. They filled in the trash, the dirt. I mean, it's not even covered by plywood anymore. They've just buried it all back in again.
Do we know anything about the future of it?
No, we have not received any permit applications.
Okay.
Okay, without any further discussion,
I have one more question for Andrea. Andrea, do we have any information about the house that is condemned on Strathmore, the yellow one?
I don't have an update. I can reach out to the county and ask them for the next meeting or council.
Okay.
So, I guess I didn't, they were at a house condemned on Strathmore.
Yeah, I learned of it after the last meeting, that small house, the yellow one, about 2 before the corner.
Yep, I know exactly where it
where
is.
they used to sell flowers.
It's been
Yes.
condemned, or it's had issues in the past, so.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, we would appreciate an update, thank you.
I think they had an estate sale there years ago too, right?
I don't know. I know a little bit about the history of that house, but I don't know anything about its housing. It's the same county staff member at the, the housing section, not rather than the permitting part of the
Mhm.
county, who we're working with, that we work with on Kenilworth, that we're working with on that, and she's very responsive. So
Mhm.
I feel like we're sort of in a different place now than we were a few months ago in terms of being able to get information, so.
Gotcha.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Without further ado, the meeting is adjourned.